All right, kids, next Sunday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It commemorates his birthday, which is actually January 15th. If he were still alive, he would be 92 years old. Throughout the rest of January and leading into Black History Month, we will see and hear more from Dr. Martin Luther King now than the rest of the year. And it will be good to learn something new, but still hear the classics to encourage us to be of service. You know, a day on, not a day off. However, inevitably, we will also see images like this, with MLK, his wife Coretta Scott, Ralph Abernathy, John Lewis, and others, versus this one of Black people looting a store. Let's make this clear. MLK said more about the economic disenfranchisement of poor people that leads to riots more than riots themselves. This misappropriation of King doesn't happen by accident. It's part of an effort to make MLK soft, more specifically, to whitewash him. Look, it's easy to quote or misquote him now, when in reality, based on what we know from polls and surveys from the 60s, the people who admire him today would have most likely hated him in his day. I'm certain their parents and grandparents did hate him in his day. This includes white and Black people in the South and all over the country. MLK was seen as a troublemaker. He was the most hated man in America. Today, Martin Luther King Jr. is perhaps remembered most for three things: being an advocate for and use of nonviolent protests, his untimely death and assassination, and his I Have a Dream speech. Some 50-something years after he was murdered, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy have been reduced to this stanza in the I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Those few seconds of the 16-minute or so speech are great in and of themselves, but taken out of context loses some of the facts surrounding that famous speech. For instance, did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. told us about his dream after Mahalia Jackson screamed for him to do so in the middle of the speech that he had already prepared? Meaning that he talked about wanting to be judged by the content of our character instead of by the color of our skin was not planned. More on that later. Also, what we know of as the March on Washington was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was a combination of 2 marches in order to advocate for civil and economic rights of Black people. And thousands of National Guard troops were brought in that day to help police in case there was rioting. There was none. Several flights that day were canceled because of bomb threats. John Lewis's speech was toned down for being too real, and for the same reason, author James Baldwin was kept from speaking at all. All because the Kennedy administration, the city of Washington, D.C., along with the federal government, expected violence. Kind of like what we just saw when MAGA and Trump supporters stormed the Capitol while Congress was tallying electorate votes. Side note. Look at my man, No Look May Somebody. Keep that in mind as we move forward, because these are the same people who tell athletes to shut up and dribble and to keep politics away from sports, like John Carlos and Tommy Smith in Mexico City didn't raise their fists during an Olympic protest. Or Jim Brown, Kareem, Bill Russell, and Muhammad Ali weren't protesting in their own way. Let me not forget about Kaepernick. These are the same people who conflate the efforts of protesters with rioters and looters as if rioting, looting, pillaging, and violence aren't how white people came into power in the U.S. in the first place. It's essentially telling Black people that they really don't see the inherent strength and value of nonviolent protests, but for us, it's not only the right way, it's the only way. All of this under the guise of Dr. Martin Luther King's nonviolence as the basis for telling Black people that we are unheard because of the method of our protests instead of the message. While it's easy for me to pick on ardent, hard-nosed, right-wing racists who carry Nazi and Confederate flags, let's not forget about white, moderate, liberal people. Fortunately, we already know about them due in part to the words and work of Dr. Martin Luther King. By the way, I'm starting to not even like black and white pictures of King because it gives a sense that civil rights is something that we've gotten past. This wasn't that long ago. Today, the white moderate uses the I Have a Dream speech to justify being colorblind and refusing to acknowledge race, not about the fight to end racism. It's little Black boys and Black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers, not sit-ins, boycotts, resistance, strikes, marches, poverty, police brutality, being arrested some 29 or so times, opposing the Vietnam War, counter-protesters hurling rocks, FBI writing a letter telling him to kill himself, standing up for what he believed despite black people being more drawn to black power movements, not being supported by white pastors and ministers, his home being bombed, burnt crosses in his front yard, his friends dying, all to get us to this point. We're going to see people present the soft, whitewashed version of MLK that they created, not what I just listed. They also don't like or respect peaceful protests until the violent ones inevitably comes afterward. If they're honest, rioting and looting brought about the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, in addition to all of what Martin Luther King Jr. and other activists did. Sadly, neither piece of legislation ended racism. Rather, they were the starts of the movement for change. And none of this helped Martin Luther King Jr. maintain his life. Even getting a federal holiday named after him was a fight. Happy birthday, King. We gonna be all right. I'm your president. I'll give you a hand. Haircut, that's black. Directly in the eye.